It started with the animals. Hunters noticed populations dwindling rapidly and inexplicably in our little patch of the enclave. Rumors spread of a deer hobbling around riddled with tumors that burst from their backs or splitting their faces in twain. One was said to have been rendered completely immobile, more tumor than deer. And then people began disappearing. Homes broken into, signs of a struggle, toppled furniture painted red with blood, but with no other trace of the families which lived there. The Fed's cover-up job was as impressive as it was terrifying to see. Seeing how efficiently those men in black worked, the media blackout, the disappearances, the patrols through the night, enforcing some unspoken curfew, it made me wonder what else they've covered up in the past to have become this experienced. But it was a huge pit for all those precious taxpayer dollars, and parents were withdrawing their kids from the program en masse. I couldn't deny it. The integration initiative was falling apart. The headmistress was a shell of a woman, hollowed out, eyes sunken, exhausted. I could only imagine how the feds must be screaming in her ear to get the situation handled now, or the truce is off. I saw her sat in her office with a glass of scotch she hadn't taken a single sip of, staring off into the middle distance. What is that phrase you humans say? No good deed goes unpunished. Her voice was hoarse and dry. Once I pulled down merchant ships into the depths of the Caribbean. Nothing mattered but my own hunger. For centuries it was a simple life. She finally took a swig of her scotch. To be a thing of horror was easy, it was to be free and without worries. But now that I've chosen to live like this, to try to be kind, to try to sow peace between our peoples, look what has become of it. What has become of me? I finally noticed what she was staring at. A photo on the wall of that familiar little boy with the dirty blonde hair. Elijah. I wanted to hold her hand and deliver some rousing speech about how doing the right thing is never easy. But to be honest, I was thinking the same thing. What the hell am I doing here? I'm not cut out for any of this. I kept telling myself, today's the last day. I'm going to quit for sure tomorrow. And then I get something like what happened this morning, when Katie walked up to me clutching her favorite little plush butterfly. You know, Mr. Vermeil, all this stuff with Saladin. It's all been really scary, she said, but you know what? Every time I'm in your classroom, stuff doesn't seem so scary anymore. Is that so? Uh-huh. Every time I'm scared, I just think about what you say to me. She puffed out her chest and lowered her voice, trying her best to imitate me. Katie, if you ever feel sad or scared, just remember somebody out there cares about you. And then I smiled, and we gave each other a fist bump. And as she ran off, I realized I could never quit this place. How could I? I had to walk into class yesterday with a cane, limping with every step in whatever fashion least aggravated the aching pain in my chest, where multiple shattered ribs had been restored by some arcane process. The tumors left a thick, bumpy ridge of scar tissue along my chest, and my neck was still far longer than it used to be. Looking in the mirror, I realized I barely even looked human. I tried not to think about it. Class had only just barely begun when the headmistress strutted in with a sudden energy to her step, her hands clasped together and something I never thought I'd see on her face, a big, beaming grin. The kids were just as awed as I was as she replaced me at the head of the class. I apologize for the interruption, Mr. Vermeil, but I think you'll agree that the announcement I have for you all justifies my intrusion. She cleared her throat. My beloved pupils, it is with pleasure that I announce to you that the notorious hunter known as Saladin has finally been brought to justice. In an instant, the classroom was alive with frantic whispers and sighs of relief, until the headmistress silenced them with a raise of her hand. Even I couldn't believe it. Everything we've been through, All that suffering and terror, it was all over. It almost seemed anticlimactic. I was so filled with relief I had to dap my cheeks with a napkin to staunch the thread of tears. Apparently, the hunter had gotten too overconfident. Tried to take out one of the kids while they were in the process of being withdrawn from the initiative while surrounded by dozens of agents. Even he couldn't escape the wrath of Uncle Sam, and I almost pitied him for whatever's being done to him in some black site somewhere. The smiles spread through the classroom like a disease, and even I couldn't wipe the grin off my face. Our long shared nightmare was over. Everything would go back to whatever normal meant nowadays. I know it must have been driving you all crazy, being so cooped inside all the time, the headmistress said. So I say we celebrate by getting some fresh air. What do you say? The class's answer was unanimous. It wasn't until we were out in the halls that I started getting a weird feeling in the back of my mind. Where were all the security agents? Why did she waltz into my class in particular to announce the news, instead of using the PA system? How could Saladin have made such a stupid mistake? It all came to a head when I realized she was leading us into those access tunnels. Now hold on, wait a minute. I suddenly froze in place. You want us to go through there? Are you sure that's safe? Why not just... Oh, come now, Mr. Vermeil, I'm just leading them to a particularly beautiful mountain view. Don't you think they've earned it? She smiled at me again, and I didn't like it. The headmistress never smiled. I felt I couldn't even steal a single gasp of air in those tunnels. My experience there was the most traumatic of my life, and just being in those tight halls made my heart pound. But it wasn't long before we'd all emerged out of one of the side entrances, dotted seemingly arbitrarily along the mountainsides as if they once connected to chambers since deemed obsolete. And I must admit it was beautiful. I savored the sight of the flock of crows rallying around the long, shimmering beam that was a waterfall peeking out from the cliff face before us, visible even through that impermeable mountain fog. And the sound of the metal security door slamming shut behind us. I turned to see the headmistress's face pressed against the glass. No, not hers. Someone else's. Someone familiar. It made sense. If he could alter his physiology at will, surely he could imitate that of another person. Yet still, I was dumbstruck. It was all I could do to blather idiotically. I didn't know you could do that. I'm trying new things, Mr. Vermeil. His voice rang clear even with the metal door between us. You should feel proud, you know. It's not often I run into someone who forces me to innovate. And then from down the mountainside, that terrible roar. The gurgles and guttural creaks of something vibrating some great and malformed vocal cords. The crash of trees being knocked over as something tears down a forest path. I only caught glimpses of it beneath us through that fog. The silhouette of a thing so weighed by mounds and stumps of oozing tissues that it's bent and hunchbacked, crawling on hands and knees like a newborn babe. Teratomas having grown from mere fingernails to entire arms and hands and limbs and faces, which themselves were then consumed by tumors and left us swollen with the throbbing spherical stromas of cancerous mass. And poking free from that anathema to all beauty was that tube-like head, that lamprey maw of teeth longer than our arms and a throat that could swallow us all whole. It was heaving and letting out those deep, roaring groans as it pulled itself up the mountainside, transfixed by the promise of prey, like the taste of us was all that could quiet its writhing agonies. There were paths from our perch back up to the school proper, but they were steep. It wasn't quite a sheer climb, but it wasn't far from being one either. I wish I could say that I was the big, bad hero who shepherded all my students up the mountainside. In truth, they left me in the dust. Even average kids were impossibly swift and energetic, and these were no average kids. The class took off up the slope like it was trivial, while I huffed and panted and scrambled up the rocks behind them, realizing all those days I'd skipped to the gym would now be the death of me. Mr. Vermeil grabbed my hand. Suddenly, an arm distended at least 20 feet lurched out at me from over the cliff face. Billy, I realized. I took his hand, and the grotesque arm retracted like a fishing line reeling in a catch, lifting me as if I was weightless. The school came into view, but that cancerous leviathan was outpacing us. Horror rocked me as I felt the very earth shake as it dug its limbs into the mountainside below to use like climbing axes, bile spewing from its esophageal tube as it roared with an intransigent hunger. We weren't going to make it. It was too vast, too powerful. And there she was before us, the headmistress. Her face was one of grim determination as she faced down the beast pursuing us. She was clad only in a gold-seamed robe, and in one easy motion she cast it aside and let it vanish with the wind. For a moment I froze in horror as her skin began to crack and break like a porcelain doll. Then I noticed the tips of tendrils poking out from the cracks, something working its way free from beneath her flesh like a butterfly emerging from its cocoon. And I remembered that terrible leviathan I had once seen in her shadow. We had just passed by her when her human body broke apart completely, and black tendrils as thick as tree stumps tore forth from all directions, as if glad to be finally freed from that prison of flesh and bone. I could not tell where it began and ended. I know only that it rivaled the cancer in sheer scale. I tried not to look at her true self, not the disguise she'd been donning. I kept my eyes forward even as behind us came the great roaring of beasts and the shaking of the earth as the two colossi slammed into one another. I grabbed a shotgun off the corpse of a security agent as we re-entered the school, for all the good that would do. My students gawked at me in awe. They'd never seen me like this before. There's supposed to be a safe room on the west wing. All we can do is wait it out while the headmistress handles that. That thing, I commanded. Go now! I followed along as they scrambled down the halls, although I made a detour, scrounging around through the headmistress's office and tucking something beneath my jacket before rejoining the kids. Students from the other classes, seeing the herd, would occasionally emerge from their hiding places and join them. Every child had been packed into the safe room when I heard another voice down the hall. It was Abigail, rushing forth to join us. Wait, Mr. Vermeil, you forgot about me. It was impossible. I'd kept a careful head count of every child to ensure none were left behind. In an instant, I raised the shotgun and unloaded it into the face of the thing pretending to be Abigail. You're not going to fool me twice. The thing bent over backwards from the force of the gunshot, to the point the top of its head rested against the ground behind its feet. Then it sprung instantly back to a standing position, its flesh beginning to twist and meld, the cruel cackle of Saladin emerging from its bullet-shredded lips. Maybe you really are smarter than I give you credit for, Vermeil. I slammed the safe room's door shut behind me and stood there with my gun pointed at it, the kids all cowering behind me. There's a silence for a while, punctuated only by the building shuddering upon its foundations as the leviathans fought outside. Then came a slow, rhythmic tapping on the door. All I have to do is wait you out, Vermeil, came the voice. Sooner or later, one of those kids with you is going to get hungry. And when they start getting desperate, you're going to look like a nice, juicy steak. Why are you doing this? I called. Just for what? The money? I'm sure whatever they're paying you, the feds can quadruple it. It's not just about the money. I consider this more of a self-funding hobby, clearing these creatures off the streets before they even have a chance to grow up and hurt anyone. Don't act like you have the moral high ground here. Not after what you did to all those people. Feeding them to the cancer just to, What? Fuel your little crusade? Was that just collateral damage to you? That seemed to actually tick him off. Those deaths are on you, not me. You're the one who forced my hand. None of this would have happened if you just... Leave them alone, they're just children. They're monsters, Vermeil, demons in human skin. They're designed to kill and devour people like you. I don't care what they are. I pumped the shotgun. They're my kids, and I'm not letting you hurt a single one of them. My heroics were interrupted, however, by what felt like a Category 5 earthquake rocking me off of my feet. It seemed those titans outside had come crashing into the school amid their brawl, tendrils and cancerous limbs tearing into the very foundations. For a moment, it felt like the entire structure would crumple in on itself and crush us like bugs. It was only by the grace by whatever gods may be that only the other wing of the school was destroyed, although some blackened tentacle tore a hole right through the wall of the safe room. Everyone and everything in the room lay in a cluttered heap. When I managed the strength to arise, Saladin was standing over me, that big grin on his face. My students were quivering with fear. I knew that, with their strength, if they all attacked at once, they could tear him to pieces. But they were frozen in place because, in the end, human or not, they were just kids. Terrified children, faced with a man who wanted to hurt them. They couldn't defend themselves. Someone had to step up and protect them. "Last chance, Vermeil," he said. "You've proven yourself competent. I could use someone with your talents." I didn't bother bantering. I just raised the shotgun and blew a baseball-sized hole through his chest. It didn't even slow him down, of course. The wound healed almost as quickly as it came, but it did infuriate him and he came stomping towards me. Good, I thought. Get closer, I need you closer. I managed to blow a few more holes in him before he smacked the shotgun out of my chest with one hand and curled his fingers around my neck with the other. I gasped and wheezed as he strangled me, lifting me off the ground as his grip on my throat tightened. Tears streamed down my face as my vision darkened. "Maybe you aren't that smart after all," he taunted. What a shame, but maybe things are better this way. After all, you might be happier down there in hell surrounded by all these demons you gave up your life protecting. And then that smug grin was wiped off his face by the feeling of something piercing through his chest. With an almost drunken stumble, he looked slowly down to see the Damascened dagger driven right through his heart. I'd snuck it from the headmistress's office, tucked it in my jacket, just in case I had the opportunity to end him with his own weapon. His grip relaxed and I fell to the floor, gasping and wheezing and sucking down fresh air. A black ichor spouted from his heart, around the throbbing wound that even he, with his powers of the flesh, could not heal. He laid there staring up at the ceiling, laughing to himself as if at the absurdity of it all. "Clever man," he whispered. "Clever, clever." And then the children descended upon him and the screaming began. I was still flickering in and out of consciousness when the kids crowded around me, concerned looks on their faces. When I finally found the strength to look down at myself, I almost fainted at what I saw. My flesh had been twisted, knotted, calcified upon my chest where I had hidden the blade, beneath my jacket, forming a hard crust of thick flesh that ran down my arm where the blade had merged with my hand. A sort of black mucormycosis oozed through cracks in callous flesh like groundwater in the Sahara. It was still changing, evolving like something was growing upon me. I could tell I was being fundamentally changed, but I couldn't tell how or into what. A couple students hefted my arms over their shoulders and escorted my limp form through the smoldering wreckage that had once been our school. And in front of the building, surrounded by the mangled flesh that was once the cancer, was a creature so immense that she was half veiled in the fog, a half-formed amorphous mass of Stygian flesh and long black tendrils, a single blue eye the size of a building staring down at me from all that darkness. I couldn't help but smile and wave weakly at her. So this is what the headmistress had been hiding under her skin all along. Together, we all watched the school burn whatever sections still remained crumbling one by one as the fire smoldered. The children kept watch on me as my body reformed itself, bones and joints cracking and reforming painlessly but uncomfortably as my figure morphed. Katie sat by my side, watching the fire consume the place she'd spent the happiest years of her short life. "It's not over," she said. "We'll find somewhere new, rebuild, make a new school far away from here." I frowned at that, imagining them finding somewhere new and leaving us all behind. But it was for the best. "I'll miss you all," I whispered weakly. She tilted her head. "What do you mean, Mr. Vermeil, you're coming with us?" My gaze drifted down to my reflection in a shard of broken glass on the pavement. My shifting, smoldering, twisted form. I looked monstrous. I looked unnatural. I looked inhuman. "After all," she said with a smile, "you're one of us now."